100%.
Thank you.
Good job, Joseph.
Thank you. I tried. Got a pun in too.
So what's up with Kant and metaphysics? Is he is he for it? Is he against it? Is it complicated?
That's a good question. I thought at the beginning he was against, but then he seems that to be for.
Yeah, that's I think he is, but it needs to go through some rigorous steps to prepare for metaphysics. So I think if we have to put it down to a for against, or he's for, but in a qualified way.
Or against the old way, right? The traditional dogmatic metaphysics.
Right, right.
Yeah, I mean, I almost want to say, for or against is just not appropriate.
Yeah.
I kind of really liked on page 7, I have it highlighted where he said, thus everything laps back to the obsolete, worm-eaten dogmatism and thence into the disdain from which this science was to have been rescued. That was there's a lot of poetic imagery he used in these first two sections that I thought were really well written.
Yeah, I think Kant is a better writer and uses more images and analogies and metaphors than you would think. And so a lot of times he'll kind of declare that that's what he's doing, and at other times he doesn't. And it kind of leaves you wondering if his image, uh, I, I don't know, I'm just going to use the word image, but uh, exactly how literally or seriously we should take some of these, like the court one. I think that's a pretty major one. The whole kind of like legislative court apparatus thing.
100%, 100%. Lawfulness and the necessity bound up in lawfulness is a guiding thread throughout all of the critiques, really.
Yeah, okay, that reminds me of the dedication, which when I first read it, I was kind of like, seriously, Kant? I mean, one thing I was wondering, that this dedication to this Baron, whatever his name is, von Zielitz, did he kind of like have to do that? Like, was he like a patron, or was it like, I don't know. I was wondering about this. Is if it's like something just by the fact that he's living in the time and place that he is, that he it's kind of a necessity to do something like this, or is he gesturing to that as a kind of additional authority for kind of I mean, I think, okay, so Khan is doing something kind of, you know, literally revolutionary. And because of that, people are going to have questions about it. And I think what he wanted to do was to try to like silence some of the common rabble of doubt against his revolution by kind of like appealing to a sort of not like tradition, but I don't know, like a legalistic authority kind of thing going on. And I think the dedication kind of gives you a preamble of that kind of vibe going on, that you're entering a court where these are questions of authority and law and you know boundary disputes and what boundary crosses over to this? Where does experience and reason, what are these boundaries and limits? So, that's that whole imagery is kind of throughout here. Uh, and there's some other ones too. So we someone mentioned this in the chat, the genealogy, and he talks about with the metaphysics as the queen, where it's like an extended metaphor. Like it's pretty interesting. It talks like, okay, there's the queen metaphysics, and she's been given this bad genealogy that ties her ancestry to this common rabble of experience, which is some kind of it's an allusion to empiricism of some type. So he's trying to kind of return the queen of metaphysics back to this royal heritage. Um, I think. I
Well,
don't know.
also remember he invokes Copernicus. So, and so my sense was he did that because I would think by the late 1700s, Copernicus wasn't revolutionary. It was accepted that, the heliocentric sense of our solar system. So, by analogy, it's, well, Copernicus was revolutionary. People thought he was a nut, but now we all accept it. Cut me some slack. Don't jump to conclusions too early because I can't lay out my entire argument all in one paragraph. So you have to withhold judgment for a while for me to be able to lay out what I'm trying to do here.
I just want to quickly, just very, very briefly, this isn't really like a point on how I see, whatever. This is just a very minor technical note, which is that I do believe that the dedication specifically, I think that Ziedler, or Ziedlitz, sorry, Ziedlitz, Freiherr von Ziedlitz, or Zedlitz, was the Minister of Education in Prussia, and I think it was directly supportive of Kant. Like, I think both like in discourse, like I think you're doing good stuff, and I support you, and materially. And so Kant Kant is kind of he's when we read him, I think Chase I just wanted to clarify just a distinction though that I think when we read him, he is kind of a being from another world in a certain sense. You know what I mean? For me, in a certain sense, in the same sense that Rick Roderick is a man from another world, the world of the modern. And I, in a sense, and those after me are beings of the postmodern. According to that little dichotomy he sets up in a lecture. I know, Eric, whatever. But for to a certain degree, Kant and his whole milieu and his work, both as it stood at the time and in the aftermath following the publication of his work and the effect that it had on the German intellectual community and Europe at large. I think there's something of a perception of him, and I think the people that he was working with and the kind of relationships he had and his like systems of Prussian patronage and so on as being kind of stuffy, conservative, really bureaucratic, and what I guess I don't know what another dismissive word would be, but basically just
Bureaucratic, administrative.
sure, whatever, culturally colored and characterized by a time and place that is very litigious and defers a lot to authority in a lot of places, like what we associate with, 17 and 1800s Europe in a lot of cases. Not all the time. In fact, large grand projects that Kant is directly supporting and voicing great admiration for are exactly counterthetical to that perception that we have, that thing that we perceive as this like sort of repressive, state apparatus of queens and of a courtroom, a legislature where you just have some sort of imperious figure like Air Judge. Kant speaks very highly at times of things like the French Revolution. And in fact, the whole impetus of this project is he speaks directly against, I think, and I know everybody here already knows this. I just want to really clarify this, that he speaks like really directly, imminently against the kind of courtly attitude that I think we can agree is kind of off-putting about that era. When he said in a footnote, when he says everything must submit, religion through its holiness and legislation through its majesty commonly seek to exempt themselves from it, from the critique, from reason's critique. But in this way, they excite a just suspicion against themselves and cannot lay claim to that unfeigned respect that reason grants only to that which has been able to withstand its free and public examination. You know what I mean? So like there is a litigious air. There's a certain legislative and a lot of the word judge is thrown out a lot, but in no point do I think that it involves like a sort of subsumption into a broader like already present like system, or you know what I mean. It has to just withstand reason and reason alone, I think, and that's why I think he was a big proponent of what he called the public use of reason, um which I think he's challenging us to do, you know what I mean. So he wants us all to be the judge.
Are you guys familiar with the essay, What is Enlightenment? Have the
Yes, I was
courage,
just thinking of that. Yeah,
right?
it's
Have the courage to use your own understanding, right? So
Aude sapere,
exactly.
Latin.
I read this dedication as Kant, right? As someone who, like, again, participates in Enlightenment thinking, revolutionary thinking, who also understands the world he lives in. He happens to be living under a benevolent Frederick the Great, who has established an order that allows him to say the things that he needs to say with minor modifications to get past the censors, right? But at least he can write this book and challenge traditional, like, rational theology. And and I think again in this German tradition in which he's working, I mentioned it before. It was it John Hus, right? The predecessor to Martin Luther,
Yeah.
who basically did. I mean, a lot of his sentiment, a lot of the content of his what he was trying to do is echoed later with Luther. But one of the substantive differences, Hus didn't have a wealthy benefactor. Martin Luther had an elector of the Holy Roman Empire backing him up. What would the Protestant Reformation have been without that wealthy benefactor backing him up? I think Kant knows that, he's living under auspiciously a benevolent liberal kind of Prussian order, while looking at, the revolution in France and saying, that's the shit. That's the shit.
Well, and also, I mean, just to put a finer point to it, remember where he lived. Most of his life was the capital of Prussia, right? Königsberg. That's where the kings of Prussia were crowned. And so it's, be a revolutionary where the capital of your monarchy is. It's you don't have that much space if you're going to be knocking things over in plain sight constantly.
Well, yeah, and if we can agree on that, and we can, right? It's like it's pretty remarkable the amount of knocking over he managed to get done. As far as I could tell, it seems like he really managed to do a lot of damage before anybody got wise. So I admire that.
So it's basically a shout out to his Patreons. Patreon.
Well, you have
Patron,
patron, right? Exactly. I mean, that's where the word Patreon comes from, right? Patron.
Yeah.
Patronage, yeah.
Right. Also, because we started with the question, just kind of a little, as an entry, metaphysics, for or against. I want to say I think it's important to point out that Kant introduces the problem of metaphysics as one that we can't dispense of. Right.
Well, yeah, because on 7, that's what I was. I guess I should just read the whole thing. Like he says, for it's futile to try and feign indifference concerning inquiries. I'm using the Pluhar translation. Where did they say here? I lost my track. Sorry about that. Moreover, however, much of those alleged indifferences tried to distinguish themselves in a popular tone by changing the language of the school, and I have underlined they inevitably fall back insofar as they think anything at all, which was a nice pun, into metaphysical assertion, the very assertions they claim to despise so much. So he seems to be saying that metaphysics, in its venture of this like aspect of like isolating it into pure reason, or what his day and age, like you can't escape metaphysics. You will always reasonably have a way to go into those questions of some form. And I also find it interesting that he kind of compares himself to Copernicus, because I think it's kind of setting the stage. Because I mean, what did Copernicus do? Essentially, is just change how science was fundamentally understood. So I think he's saying there's inevitability. You can't escape metaphysics. You'll always find yourself like asking the questions that you're trying to avoid. And he's setting, like, I mean, you could say it's arrogant, whatever, but he has the skills to prove it, I guess. He's kind of setting the stage for him of forming a new Copernican revolution in the realm of what I'm going to assume is the foundation of kind of a spin on German idealism.
So I have a question. I mean, obviously, he's trying to solve this problem, like, right? Obviously, metaphysics is, I mean, maybe it's not undergone a proper critical examination of its own method. So he's optimistic in a way, or he's trying to, maybe by delimiting this type of boundaries of pure reason, he believes that he can secure metaphysics on a firm, like, scientific footing and avoiding all this previous failure that he had.
Yeah, I think so. That's a good point. Like a firm footing or a foundation or a security, like by setting the boundaries of what reason can and cannot do. Like I think yes, I think so.
Yeah, I think that idea of the well-founded grounding, and especially of metaphysics in particular, that's one of his main things. Is we have to examine the grounds for metaphysics, and that's what he's really trying to do. Establish, okay, what are the criteria for being able to say that this is well-founded? And that kind of gives them I think that's really so some of this I read a little bit of Heidegger's book on Kant, like 5 pages, but he really stresses this point that that's what Kant is doing with the Critique of Pure Reason, that he's establishing the well-established, well-grounded grounds for eventually the science of metaphysics, which Heidegger associates with fundamental ontology, which I'm a little skeptical about, but whatever. But yeah, I think he's definitely. So I read it kind of with that in mind, and I think there's definitely something like that going on, that he is trying to establish that the grounds for the outline of metaphysics, which he says that can be completed kind of afterwards, which makes me wonder, I guess, another kind of semi-historical question, like, so did he ever like actually write this metaphysics of nature thing? I don't think he did, but I don't know. Is that um I'm kind of curious if he actually did do this, like, so he's establishing the outlines for it. But then did he then write it out, this metaphysics of nature that he talks about?
Yes.
That's
Later on,
the posthumous work?
metaphysical foundations of natural science.
Oh, okay.
He goes into more detail on some of the things that he just kind of sets up, like a conceptual framework in the Critique of Pure Reason. He goes into more like detailed content on the nature of matter, such things.
Yeah, that seems pretty important. I wonder why. I mean, it's not, his critiques are what everybody talks about, probably for good reason, but it seems like the other aspect that he's talking about is equally, not equally, but pretty important as well.
Yeah, it's the critiques where we find the transcendental approach to philosophy put into action. The metaphysics, the groundwork for metaphysics, and the metaphysics of natural science. These are more like where he applies, that the findings from his transcendental research in a more like, let's just lay out our basic concepts, right?
Do you know if was he influential for the scientists either of his time or kind of after?
Yes. And he was a scientist himself.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
But yeah, if you read, I think Heisenberg has a piece, Physics and Philosophy. He starts out pretty much like, okay, starting with Kant, right? What he did here, that's pretty good. It's pretty good. But we've moved on, there's some issues. But there's a reason why he starts there.
Yeah, I think Kant's emphasis on of our knowledge of things being the knowledge of appearances and not necessarily what they quote unquote really are. Um, just made it more possible for physics to sound like it was arguing with itself. That light can be made up of both photons and waves. I mean, I can't imagine scientists of Newton's time accepting that. And yet that was accepted when Einstein swung behind Louis de Broglie's assertion of light being a wave in like 1927, after Max Planck had already, 2 decades roughly before, talked about the photon. So, everybody considers Einstein more Newtonian in rejecting Heisenberg's insights, but it was Einstein who made de Broglie's findings much more accepted within a relatively short amount of time when they just simply wouldn't. And it seems to me that Kant's emphasis in a sense, all our looking at things from the human point of view, a human being's point of view, from our perspective, is very important in 20th century physics.
Yeah, that's this Copernican turn. I've heard described a couple of ways. One shorthand is reversing the direction of fit within epistemology, mind to objects or objects to mind. Goodness, there was another one. I'm sorry. There was a second way of, and I was going to build off of that, but it slipped out of my mind as I was explaining the first one. I'll remember it when somebody else is talking.
It's the conformity of the object of cognition to our forms of cognition, subjective forms or whatnot. Some of the terminology I think I'm still learning, but I think
Right.
that's the point he makes towards the end of the section we read, that I think that's kind of like his big innovation, and that's also has that revolution, that inversion aspect to it.
Right, right. So, you saying that reminded me what I was going to say. It was Henry Allison describes this Copernican turn, right, as a shift between, the epistemological paradigm where knowing objects just consists in knowing what it is, independently of subjectivity as such, right? Hitherto, this is what metaphysics has been trying to establish, right? How we can know these objects as they are in themselves, right? And then this announcement of this, let's make experiment with a different method, right? Let's reverse the order of operations. And the way Allison describes it is this paradigm, the prior paradigm, asks you to confirm, right, of your impressions, of your presentations or representations of the world, that they are identical or match the world out there as you might conceive it, independent of the forms of sensibility or knowing, which another way of saying is from a God's eye view, or Spinoza's term, right? Subspecie eternitatis, from the aspect of eternity. That's, traditional metaphysics has been trying to establish or trying to describe the world where the paradigm of knowing is knowing from God's perspective, right? And now Kant is like, we keep running into troubles when we try to do that. Let's just think of these objects as conforming to our finite human perspective. Instead of subspecie eternitatis, right? It's more like subspecie finitude, or whatever the Latin term. Somebody with Latin could probably give the right form, but it's finitude, right? Finitatis.
I think there's actually I think Kant addresses this directly, right? I think he calls it intellectus ectypus and intellectus archetypus are kind of the two, like, archetypus being the one that people sought as this, like you're saying, this mind that knows beyond what, we can understand as a mind to know. So it's some sort of intellect. That's all we know about it, is some sort of hypothetical intellect that could know a thing, beyond any sort of finite conditions of an intellect. And he's like, that's this intellectus archetypus that's kind of sought after, this prized jewel, that turns out to just be a snipe. You know what I mean? Like not there. And I think he has another word, intellectus ectypus, something like that. It's a bunch of Latin, which I don't speak, so I get confused.
Yes, some of those are actually kind of, I think that ectypus, okay, I'm going off on a limb here. I think that's actually Greek mainly. And so arches is Greek.
It's all Greek to me. I don't know.
Good one. Drink to that. Oh,
So a lot of the discussion has been relating the beginning of the first preface with the preface to the second edition, particularly the examples, but it seems like to me that Kant's describing two different projects within the first preface and the second. Or at least could be, because there are sections particularly around, looking for the German pagination, at the bottom of, like, oh man, Latin numerals, AXVI, or 103 on the Gyroid, where he talks about the fact that he's done a kind of dicursive clarity through concepts project, where he treats reason as thinking and thinking as a faculty of something, of the self or of the mind. And then at least thinking is something he's familiar with, so he can construct a kind of proof around thinking. But then when you go into the preface to the second edition, he goes to great lengths to kind of distance the project that he's setting towards from math and logic, at least through the first few pages. I don't know if anybody else got this sense, but I wanted to raise a question, I guess, about it.
This is a transitionary work that the first edition, after he published it, he some of the feedback, he's like, oh no, that's not what I meant though. That's not what I meant, right? I'm gonna have to do some edits, right? And then I think in the process of editing, he himself came to a different way of formulating what he thinks is really essentially the same project. And I was just curious though, like in the second preface, in what way do you think he's moving away from math and logic?
I don't see him as moving away from math and logic in the sense that he's not, it's obviously a big part of his account. But in the first preface, he explicitly describes his project as finding the limit of reason. And in the second preface, he kind of shifts his framing. He talks about logic being an example of a system, which is what he's wanting to do. He wants to create a system for understanding reason, right? And logic's a system that's mostly stable, barring some small issues he has with Aristotelianism, but I'm assuming we'll get to that. But it seems by the point where he starts talking about metaphysics that he wants something that's only grounded in empiricism, or he wants something that's grounded in empiricism, and because of that, it can't be solely grounded in rationalism. So he's kind of balancing the scales between what is empirical and rational. So it can't be a simply deductive project like it seems like he's setting up in the first preface.
Yeah, I think I guess my impression was that he's still doing that critique of pure reason, which requires kind of establishing these boundaries and these distinctions within reason. And he kind of goes into describing some of that in uh he doesn't nearly go in as much detail in the A preface, but he talks somewhat about this idea of the faculty of the understanding, the determination of its rules and boundaries of its use, and the chief question: what and how much can understanding and reason cognize free of all experience? So I think that's going to be the way that he's also going to describe his kind of overall project of this critique of pure reason in the B as well. So in the introduction, I know he talks more. So he goes into that analytic synthetic judgment distinction, where it's kind of this chief question of how synthetic judgments are possible, synthetic a priori judgments. That's going to be kind of like one of the leading question, the chief question that kind of guides the whole critique of pure reason, it seems like. So I think he's establishing the same kind of overall arc, but like Eric was saying, yeah, it's definitely uh with the A there's a transition period. At least that's what I got.
Right. I think I'm just kind of glomming onto him saying that things like math determines its objects purely a priori, whereas a critique of pure reason would not be able to do that. And that's something that's only present in the second edition preface.
I I think he talks about that in the Transcendental Aesthetic, where he goes into, I might be wrong about this, where he gives somewhat of his account of math more in there, where it has to do with the forms of intuition of space. And but yeah, I think I can't remember the way he described it in a somewhat succinct fashion. I guess you're saying that in the A preface, which I think that's going to be his kind of his full like mature account of math, although in a summary form. So I think he does keep that consistent. And then so one of the things I think this is more okay, so I read a little ahead, but I think towards the end of the B preface, he talks explicitly about the second edition, and he says that basically all he did was just presented a better presentation, but the core ideas are still the same, which I'm a little skeptical of, maybe a little, um, but I can see why he's claiming that. I mean, I think he probably believed it, but he's saying that yeah, that all I need to do is there's misunderstandings. My presentation wasn't perfect, but this system he's got it on lock. It's a complete comprehensive system. And yeah, I mean, one of the things about Kant that reading this is really he's got this like humble bragging thing where he's saying he's being modest by talking about the limits of reason, but it's very ambitious what he's doing by having this kind of um apodictic certain comprehensive system that will solve all the problems of metaphysics. So, and he's saying that he's gonna just he's still chugging along with that with both editions here. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess the way I read it, like we 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 read the 25 today, right? 25 is what we're supposed to read. I didn't read ahead again. I hope I didn't. Um, yeah, like on 24, he says, yet this very situation permits the experiment that will countercheck the truth of the result that we obtain from the first assessment of our a priori rational cognition, viz., that our rational cognition applies only to appearances and leaves the thing in itself uncognized by us, even though inherently actual. For what necessarily implies us to go beyond the boundary of experience in all appearances is the unconditioned that reason demands in things in themselves. Reason necessarily and quite rightly demands this unconditioned for everything conditioned, thus demanding the series of conditions to be completed by means of the unconditional. And that kind of confused me quite a bit, and I had to reread that section, but it's almost like he's laying the groundwork that like our concept of epistemology that he's like again with the whole Copernican thing is that like that our epistemology has to conform to the thing, but I think he's suggesting that that the objects are from an epistemic viewpoint conform to how we see them, which if I'm not mistaken is very different. Like there's no axioms to discover inherently in the object with like some form of logical positivism. He's saying that we have to shift how we view metaphysics so that it's not necessarily knowledge of the thing, but the way the thing presents itself epistemically to us. Then again, I could be completely wrong.
I can run with that. I mean, with qualifications. To my understanding, the distinction between epistemology on the one hand and ontology on the other hand is something that comes after, I think, Hegel, and kind of in a response to Hegel, to kind of say, look, Kant did it better. You know what I mean? He was centering epistemology, and then Hegel came and messed it up. So, but I think that kind of a distinction is a little bit post hoc, but it's fair. I think Kant is primarily in what we now would recognize in an epistemological mode, but it is not exclusively, right? So one way of conceiving this is he's demanding a metaphysics that's run through the gauntlet or the strainer of a rigorous epistemology.
Okay. And to make sure my understanding is correct, ontology is ontos, the study of being. Epistemology, epistemo, is the study of how we process knowledge, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And there's a speculative unity between thinking and being, but we'll get to that in the successive volumes.
I just wanted to that's cute. That's fun. I'm excited. I'm excited. I'm really excited to see how we could speculatively unite thinking and being. Who knows how successful we'll be.
Spinoza already did.
It depends on who you ask. All right, Chase. It depends on who you ask. All right. Now I've made a vow to myself that I would not veer away from Kant, and I intend to keep that vow for the duration of this seminar. on this book.
Fine.
So
Challenge accepted.
yeah, I'm not
I'm
going to
going to
start.
provoke you. I'm going to keep
I
provoking
don't
you.
know. I don't know, Eric. That doesn't sound very dialectical to me. Does
I'm
it?
not gonna entertain any. I've never heard of that. I don't know what that is.
Uh,
What I do know is I know about things like the foundation or of the deduction of pure concepts of understanding. I know about that stuff, that sort of stuff. I'm all in that world. All right. I don't know about your dialectics and so on. So while I'm here, steeped in this stuff, I wanted to say in response to something, Tori, you were kind of, where does the where does the like break come from in this like it seemed like there was this sort of key piece of your contention or your question or your confusion or your search for clarification that I wanted to kind of zoom in on, and it was this move away from math and science or math and physics. This what you saw as sort of a migration away from math and physics, or at least from the modality by which analysis is conducted as it is in math and physics. And here's just a this is not going to clarify that at all. So don't get too excited. I'm actually going to kind of probably just be more confusion because here's the thing. I saw that little section and we were talking about using the German pagination. So I think we could. I don't know what well, then again, we're talking about the XXII stuff, right? Okay. So wherever he starts talking about, yeah. Actually, yes, I know it's 107 in my edition, which is not a page number to people without this edition. So it's BX, or BX and BXI. That's it. It's BX. That's the German page that this whole hoogie doo is happening on, because he says, insofar as there is to be reason in these sciences, this is 2 lines before the start of BX. It's the middle paragraph of 107 for the Geyer Wood. Something in them must be cognized a priori, and this cognition can relate to its object in either of 2 ways. Either merely determining the object and its concept, or else and I'm skipping the parenthetical, or else also making the object actual, right? And I figured when he was doing all this, he was just trying to or like he was kind of laying down that it was a follow-up to a previous thought. That previous thought being that logic is a perpedeutic. He was talking about logic as a perpedeutic, the courtyard outside of the science. And then past the courtyard, how does reason get past the courtyard, That's what it seemed like to me. And maybe I'm totally confused, but it seemed like he was trying to tell a story of how does reason get past the courtyard? How does reason get past the perpedeutic of science? And here's the thing though. In something like his descriptions of these 2 modes by which reason is in the science, is literally insofar as there is to be reason in these sciences, it has to be one of these 2 modes, this math and physics pure determining, or this. I don't think he gave a concrete example, which he did say he would have trouble doing. He did clarify, he's like, I might have some trouble getting up with examples, so don't get on me about that. So I'll give him a pass. But the second thing, the theoretical reason, he didn't give like a consonant science or something to show that. You know what I'm saying? And so by the end and then by BXIV, which for us is 109 and Geyer Wood, he starts talking about reason, understanding nature. It must seek knowledge in accordance with what reason puts in it. Okay, that's all well and good, but there's a space in between that for me is something of a black hole between this discussion of these 2 modes of science, reason and science. And I know that it's a pretty easy move between the 2, but there's some little piece that's missing. I don't know, because where I'm at, frankly, and I know this might seem just totally soft, just sophomore, but I couldn't really. I got that there are these modes by which reason is in science, in these sciences, but then I didn't really get a sense of him committing to one or the other. He talked about Francis Bacon positively, but I don't know if he ever said fuck this one, I love this one, or I'm not so sure about this, we're moving towards this. I think it felt like he just kind of brought him up and then was like, we're gonna have to do all this. we're gonna have to kind of go through all of this if we're gonna, you know, get through this to the bottom of this. It seemed like that would. It didn't seem like it was like a one or the other. Is that, am I wrong? What are you
I'm
guys?
okay. I'm just incredibly confused because he does say that he gives an example of two theoretical cognitions of reason, which are mathematics and physics.
Right. I'm sorry. Maybe I misspoke. He gives two examples of the theoretical, but then he has this other one that's what's the word he uses? Not okay, practical. Yeah, right. The practical, the critique of practical reason. That's what I thought is the whole. And this is the critique of pure theoretical reason and he's just kind of, this is kind of the setup for the 800-page punchline. I didn't know if it was necessarily like a distantiation from one or the other. You know what I'm saying?
Right. So yeah, that was the math, science. These are how we know the world, right? Practical reason is how we direct our will in activity. So there's knowledge, and then there's the rational direction of the will, right? On the one hand, we're looking for the natural sciences and a metaphysical foundation so that the natural sciences have legitimacy, right? And on the other hand, practical reason, a metaphysics of morals, right? And this is, I mean, it's a very important distinction because, I mean, to give up a little bit of what's coming, right? The question of the existence of God has one status over here and a very different status over here. And then that just kind of begs the question. I think Hunter, I thought you were refraining, but I mean, I'm going to have to push you a little bit maybe. This gap between theoretical and practical, right? Between the first critique and then the second critique, and how do we reconcile these together into a holistic system? This is the subject of the critique of judgment, the third critique, which our buddy Georg Wilhelm Friedrich really exploits in the dialectical kind of interpenetration of theory and practice, right? So there's more to come, but you have to keep reading.
So I had a question about the so when he's talking towards the end about this, he kind of goes into that dialectic, and this is where he talks about this split between, you know, the old metaphysics, the way of assuming that cognition must conform to the object as it is in itself. And then his way of doing things where it's the reverse, but you don't get the object in itself, you get appearances. And this is basically what speculative reason is limited to. But then he talks about that also with this distinction about the unconditioned. And I was somewhat confused about what is going on there. You know, I know he gets into it later with the dialectic stuff, but I was somewhat confused about what's going on with. So the problem with the old metaphysics, it seems, is that it takes something, the objects of cognition, as something is unconditioned, where he's saying that we need to we need to, I guess, like exclude the unconditioned from at least speculative reason, I think. But then practical reason, I think, can properly attain the unconditioned. I don't know. I was confused about that.
What page is it?
So it's in the Geyer Woods, it's 112 or B double X.
In the Pluhar edition.
Yeah, the Geyer Woods,
You
the
didn't,
B.
we needed to use the same
Yeah,
one.
B20.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's page 24.
Right.
Before I forget, Tori, you had mentioned why he was mentioning mathematics and physics, and I have this highlighted, and I don't want to diverge too much. I'm sorry, but I didn't want to say this before I forget because it'll get lost in ADHD brain. On 17, I have highlighted, but we must not think that it was. Well, I can just do the whole thing. It makes sense if I do this part. Mathematics has been following the secure path, which are the note for the translation there, of science since the earliest times which the history of human reason extends. It did not already, I need to turn the light on because I can't see, among the admirable people for the Greeks, but we must not think that it was easy, as easy for mathematics to hit upon the royal road, which I thought was really interesting, or rather to build it on its own as it was for logic, where reason deals only with itself. And what I'm wondering, when we read this whole section is that if he's saying like mathematics is a form of like logic that exists outside of sensory experience, whereas physics requires application, like that it is possible to have a synthesis between some form of reason or logic that coincides with like an understanding of what our applications are in the world. So I'm wondering if he's like trying to like hint that mathematics is rationalism and physics itself is some form of like relation to empiricism, but I don't know if that's right.
So
Like,
logic would be the rules of thought, qua thought.
okay, but
Mathematics would be the laws or the rules of sensory experience,
but
space time.
there can be a synthesis though between them. That's what is that what he's hinting at? That there is some type of synthetic merging between the two?
Well, sure. I mean, because geometry is predicated on logic, yes?
Yeah.
Principle of contradiction and things like that, right? Where logic is really just thought policing itself internally, right? Purely formally, right? The mathematics has a content apart from logic, and that content is space and time or quantity, right? Then physics is the lawfulness of the external world. For our purposes here, we're looking at Kant. When we're investigating metaphysics, or even more like the ground for any when we're investigating physics, or like more like the ground for any possible physics, it's the lawfulness of the world, laws of nature, right? How do we even get off by saying that nature is lawfully ordered? In the wake of Hume, how can you even say that nature is lawfully ordered? Right? The physicists just take it for granted that nature is lawfully ordered. But how, as a philosopher, can you actually like secure the claim that we can say of the world outside of us that it is lawfully ordered, right? Of necessity.
Eric, there's something that was brought up in something jumped out at me in BXX in the Pluhar. It's page 24. I think everybody has though the B, A, and B and the Roman numerals, right? So it's BXX, which in Pluhar is page 24. On either side of footnote 83, in the first, well, the only paragraph on that page, Kant says, our rational cognition applies only to appearances and leaves the thing in itself uncognized by us, even though inherently actual. And it's the last four words that throw me off, even though inherently actual. I thought if Kant's whole push here was to say, let's reduce what we say we can know, and we have to start with how our senses apprehend the world instead of us pretending that we know the thing in itself. But then those last four words he seems to be saying, yeah, we can't know things in and of themselves because we only know appearances, but those things are inherently actual. They actually do exist.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between existence and actuality. We'll may have to pay closer attention to see how this actually plays out.
Okay.
Because
But
he does
do you understand why I was a little like that jumped out at me?
right, that little qualifier, even though it's, yeah. I mean, again, he's not a Berkeleyan idealist where everything is a projection of the mind, right?
Okay.
He wants to establish that the things that we experience as external to ourselves really are external to ourselves. What they are in their externality, pure externality to us, right? Taking away all of the forms of knowing we can't say, right? And he later on he will say we can't even say they exist, right? But here he says they're actual.
Okay.
So how do we reconcile that? I think there's a fine line to be drawn between actuality and existence, but also I think we might also chalk a little bit of it too. I mean, again, there's much ink spilt on the exact status of the thing in itself, how we're supposed to conceive it to be true to Kant, like so many different arguments on this. But I think we have to also bear in mind that this is a transitionary text, right? Like he's kind of breaking new ground, so things appear new to him too, right? So he's not always fully consistent and precise.
Okay. Thanks.
I wanted to, yeah, and because Chase was bringing up the issue of the unconditioned, this is a really big deal too. But he gets much more explicit later on at the very beginning of the second part, the transcendental dialectic. But basically what he is saying here, and kind of, touching on the point I made earlier, when he insists at the beginning that it's not a matter of whether we're pro or against metaphysics. It's, metaphysics is never done with us, right? It's just, we're kind of trapped in this situation where we want to ask these questions. What is ultimate reality? Is there a God? Are we free? These he describes as reasons, he really boils it down. It is reason's propensity to, given a conditioned, to ask what is the unconditioned, right? Or what, given an effect, what is the underlying cause? And you take this, and you could go ad infinitum to where it gets really murky, right? And again, there's an important boundary line, right? We can ask for the, given an effect, we can ask for the cause. Given the conditioned, we can ask for the unconditioned, or what was behind it. What conditioned? Well, yeah, sorry. There's conditioned and, like the conditioned and the conditioning or the conditioner, right? Ultimately, the unconditioned is the object of metaphysics, right? But he was going to say he's going to lay it out as unconditioned. It goes beyond the possible realms of any possible experience. And so we can't claim knowledge of the unconditioned. Even though reason wants us always to try to push towards this knowledge, he's going to demonstrate that, it sets us up, it sends us on almost a fool's errand. You know what I mean? Just the natural, naive constitution of reason without reflecting on itself, you're going to go off on a fool's errand. It's the self-consciousness and the reflection of reason into itself that lays bare, okay, this is where it works and this is where it doesn't work.
So like epistemically, it's inescapable.
Well, yeah, I think he's, I mean, again, to kind of channel Heidegger's emphasis that this is a, finitude, right? I think Kant is kind of taking it on the chin. Given that we're finite, we're going to always be asking about, again, given that we're finite, but we live in a world that seems to operate of necessity and have kind of universal laws that kind of in some way participate in eternality, right? The geometry seems to participate in eternality in some sense, right? Like these things that are products of our knowledge seem to transcend finitude, right? How do we make sense of that, right? Well, we're finite. We're always trying to get beyond our finitude. But there are limits to how far we can go beyond our finitude.
And out of curiosity, with the conditioned and unconditioned, with the self-reflection of reason, is that where you're drawing a parallel between Kantian tradition and Hegelian?
I think this is just yeah, it's a it's a marker that Kant lays down that Hegel and others later respect, not just Hegel.
Yeah, so that's where he gets into the whole dialectic, and it leads to the antinomies of reason when we take that unconditioned in this way that he's talking about.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, he gets more explicit.
Yeah, I've read some of the that dialectic section, so you saying that jogged my memory. Though I'm kind of sad that the unconditioned is left for practical reason, which is just morality. But I don't know, man. I'm trying to be neutral here and I'm not gonna go into any kind of Nietzschean rant about morality. I'm somewhat tempted to. Maybe, I don't know. He talks about this speculative reason versus practical. He talks about that a little more in the section that we're gonna read next week. So maybe then I'll do it. I don't know. But I'm gonna try to keep to Kant as much as I can, especially Hunter. If Hunter's kind of foregoing his bingo card, then I feel like that there's like pressure on me to do the same in a way. Uh,
I'm very impressed. I'm so impressed.
yeah. Maybe I should also say something. I mean, I already said the word. I said the name Nietzsche in honor of Nevitt, who's not here,
Oh, oh yeah. Pour one out for Nevitt.
in Iceland. The elves and Sigaros and what else do they have there? I don't know.
They have the Faroese Islands; those are kind of close.
They have
We went,
volcanoes.
Oh
geothermal
yeah,
vents.
volcanoes, yeah.
We have the Faroe Islands are like close enough that I count that as kind of similar North Sea culture. They're the only place on Earth where you can still whale. I'm pretty sure. I mean, Japan still there's some Japanese uh, fishing zaibatsus still participate, but they're allowed to because it's like we used to do it, we still do. And everybody was like, "Oh, you shouldn't." But fuck you. So we're gonna keep doing it, and so they still do. They kill whales, but whatever.
It's
So
sustainable.
Yeah, there
maybe
seem to be a lot of them
uh
now.
so maybe Nevitt can go reenact Moby Dick up there.
That'd be cool.
Hunter, I do want to say I always really appreciate how I learn something new from you. Like your
Oh,
knowledge
thanks.
and in facts. I had no idea about Iceland.
Yeah, the Faroe Islands. There's also, if you want to know about Iceland, there's a cool movie called Nói the Albino, or in Icelandic,
Let's put it in the chat.
Nói Albinoi. Yeah, it's spelled like whatever. Anyway, so this was not my intervention here was while it was partly to talk about Iceland. It was also to mention that just to piggyback on, just to keep talking on what you're hitting on, Chase, this unconditioned in the realm of morality, and how that might be much to the chagrin of whomever. Um, I think that I think
To my
that
chagrin, really.
well, yeah, right. Well, yeah, there are people who think like you. There are a few. There are at least one or two, so to them too.
It's kind of scary to think about, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Let's hope they're not in any sort of office or power. Sorry. but I have other people, like you and Nietzsche kind of rattling around in my brain telling me about this or that about morality. But as far as I understood, I think that the unconditioned in the domain of the moral or of the, moral reasoning for Kant is pretty, I mean, I like that. I find that to be something that it gives space for me to defend Kant against people whom I think are wrong. And so when people say something like, well, Kant's project produces this sort of categorical thinking that leaves open the question of what one's duty is at all. And thusly, I might be a part of some defense force or some special operating unit that happens to be charged with some horrible activity that you might find morally reprehensible or ethically dubious, but I'm just doing my duty. And per that logic, I am so in line with Kant. And isn't this such an obvious critique, right? And I would say, and my immediate response, and Eric, I agree with you. You're shaking your head. God, no, right? And this first step of kind of outlining what he sees as like the import of a moral ethical project, or not more like a project, but the moral, like in his schema. I think this room for the unconditioned there is what saves the whole thing from being like, yeah, I was just following orders, because if you take the notion of like the unconditioned, you know, seriously, then you don't get to say, you specifically cannot say, whoopsie, I had to, I was conditioned so, and I couldn't have done otherwise than to do this evil shit that I'm now currently, while you're attacking me for it, admitting is evil. I was just following order. You specifically can't do that. You have to choose what your duty is, in fact. You have to literally like commit to a duty. And there's no real like meter stick to decide which one of the duties, the millions of duties that people have, which one of those yours is. You got to get in there, and it to me it's always seemed like kind of the silver bullet to that sort of thinking and that sort of attack on German idealism. That's so.
I'm a little bit glad, a little bit sad that Nevitt's not here right now. Because actually this issue, I mean, I think as far as I think I'm following it, right? Was a little bit of a point of contention in the spring course. Okay. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant is saying of notions like God, freedom, the soul, right? That speculative theoretically, we cannot claim knowledge, right? He's not then going into the realm of morals and saying, forget I said all of that. I can tell you we're free, right? And so like others, Nevitt and others, have tried to read like his claims and his ethics as contrary to the claims well, you know what I mean? More to the point, the question kept coming up. It wasn't just Nevitt, it was others in the class. Now that we have this ethics and then Hegel's philosophy of right and then all of these other theories that are predicated on this notion of human freedom. Wait. When did we ever prove that human freedom actually exists? It's a thing. Whoa. Okay, go back to the first critique. In the first critique, we dispense with the question of proving freedom, right? This is our speculative mode, our theoretical mode, where we try to prove whether freedom exists or not, right? Again, in the practical mode, he kind of takes it on the chin. I am not going to prove freedom. I'm just going to point out that we hold each other morally responsible. And if we're going to continue to hold each other morally responsible, it seems that we have to presuppose freedom. Given that, how can we make this rational? How does reason, how reason brought into this little jack-o'-lantern, how does it shine out, right? Just given these assumptions, he is not trying to prove that freedom exists. He's trying to prove that we can't prove that freedom exists. And this shouldn't be a stumbling block for later, like thinking about freedom in the moral sphere, right? On the one hand, you can't scientifically prove one way or the other whether freedom exists. But this is a theoretical mode of knowing of objects in the external world or internal world, right? We're not knowing objects. We're directing rationally our activity and our desire. It's a different application of reason, whether we're knowing an object or whether we're informing and cultivating our reason and desire.
Isn't that similar? Is there a section of his work, of one of these, that's called Religion in the Bounds of Reason? Because
That's a separate work.
Separate work. Okay, so he has separate work, Religion in the Bounds of Reason. I listened to this whole lecture by this guy from Wheaton, so super Arthur Holmes. So, but long ago, years and years ago, I listened to these lectures. 108 hours of this guy just fucking going like, you see? He says something and then it'll be like, you see? He's got this British accent, but he talked about religion and the bounds of reason. And it seems like that is kind of the spirit there, right? It is that we're not trying to prove unequivocally, like, Anselm or, whatever. Like we're
Exactly.
not, that's not the project. And so those critiques, while they're interesting questions, they're just not relevant to the analysis, the work that's happening. You know what I'm saying? That's what it seemed like to me. It was kind of, that's not in the framework. In fact, he literally says, like, in preface A, I think he's like, the question is, what can we think free of experience? What can understanding think free of experience, or cognize free of experience? Not how does thinking happen and what is going on there and like that stuff and like what is it? Like, yeah. So it's a very interesting blend between like a real confidence, like a real cavalier revolutionary French like spirit almost, but then a very modest German overriding influence, right? It's thinking.
Totally. I totally agree with that. I know he was really influenced by Rousseau,
Right.
so I think there's some of that in there too.
Totally. Yeah, he's got a prior commitment to Rousseau and freedom, human freedom. He's not doing a presuppositionless philosophy quite when he's doing especially when he's doing the moral philosophy. But I want to say also, because Hunter mentioned the preface, kind of what I was just saying earlier. He's, the status of these questions. Is there a God? Are we free? Like he kind of announces here in the A preface that he gives an answer to these questions which doesn't satisfy the dogmatist. And it kind of reminded me of some of the exchanges that were in the dialectics class, because it's like, well, no, but does freedom exist or not exist? Like, no, we're not asking that question anymore. Well, we kind of still have to answer that question if we're going to proceed with any ethical. No, we can't answer that question anymore, right? Like, and it just reminded me, like the phrasing he uses here just kind of reminded me of what I felt like would have been a good response. Like, I'm sorry, it's on page X13, or page 9 in the Pluhar near the top. To be sure, my answers to these questions have not turned out to be such as a raving dogmatist thirst for knowledge might expect. Nothing but magical powers, at which I am no adept, could satisfy that kind of thirst for knowledge. So, like, I'm engaging, I'm touching on metaphysics here, but if you're trying to corner me and ask me to proclaim whether God exists or freedom exists as like a mode of theoretical knowledge, sorry, I'm not magic, dude. I can't answer that question. In fact, I'm trying to show you why we can't answer that question.
I know it's, a little inappropriate parallel, but it's like when Zizek talks about, like, if you had Foucault in an elevator and you thought, do we have free will or not? Answer me. And he's kind of, well, all I can do is talk about the presuppositions that both yes and no. And you grab him by the lapels and you really shake him. No, you tell me. I've had enough. And he would never give. He would never budge. He would just, oh, I don't know. Look, all I could say is that all the possible answers that you could extort out of me would be happening within a similar sphere of an epistemological horizon. And well, you know what I mean? There's no secret. You know what I mean? It's not like there's no man behind the curtain that's trying to, keep that away from you for now. Like this is it, it's a similar experience I had to when people are like Eric, you remember when people finished phenomenology and it was like, that's it? Where's the answer? What's the absolute? And I'm like, that's the punchline. And I feel like I'm fucking Boo Boo the Fool over here trying to be like, honk honk. You got pranked. You read a whole book with no ending, basically. But that's at least how I feel they see me sometimes, But I'm with you there.
I wouldn't want to be trapped in an elevator with Foucault. It's bad news.
I would.
You start talking about the Iranian Revolution, you just start, going off.
Oh no. Oh God. Yeah, I had a friend once who demanded that I give a yes or no response to the question, does God exist? And I just absolutely refused to do it. And he was very frustrated. And I was just like, whatever, I don't care. Not I just kept being like, what do you mean by God? Like what does that even mean? Yeah, it's but I think there's something about with the critique of pure reason where he's giving this not sure if I'm using this terminology right, but a critique of rational theology, in that you can use speculative reason to determine I mean, I'm basically repeating what Eric already said, but like the existence of God and freedom and immortality of the soul. He's saying no, you can't do that, and that's what a lot of the whole second half of this book is explaining exactly why. So I mean, that's pretty revolutionary to go back to the full circle of this question of kind of like where his commitments lie in terms of his own kind of age and these things. I would say there's definitely, there's like revolutionary elements to Kant. There's also elements where he's gonna want to go back to more of a, say, like a baseline kind of uh not rock the boat too hard. But I think on that critique of rational theology and all these ideas like the simplicity of the soul or whatever he gets into, those are pretty uh radical, I would say. So something to look forward to. And something that, I could maybe bracket out the fact that he has all these presuppositions about the facts of reason's practical data. Uh, whatever. He gets into that mostly in the second critique. So maybe I can bracket that out and just focus on the positive, that he's critiquing rational theology. Because otherwise it'll be difficult to get through. I think the second critique I would probably not make me too happy, but this first critique hopefully will. I don't know. I'm happy by what I've read so far. Thanks, Kant, for making me happy.
I think the second critique is also pretty good. Yeah, I think you'd find it more reasonable than it might look like at first glance looking from a distance.
According to what interest of reason? Speculative or practical?
I mean, it's practical, yeah.
Yeah.
You have to figure, you know what I mean? You have to be able to put aside the speculative. Which again, in our modern era, that's almost, I say I want to say it's a more acute problem that today than when Kant was writing. But also part of what Heidegger's on about and being in time, right, is like this theoretical, speculative knowing of the world that's kind of divorced from our practical activity, right? That's an attained viewpoint, right? To be able to kind of, what Gadamer was kind of talking about with aesthetic reduction, right? To reduce away all of these other elements and just focus on knowing, you know what I mean? You've already withered away or winnowed away all of the important engaged in a project practical aspects of what you're trying to do to begin with, right? So he kind of asks in the second critique and the third critique, which mediates, he's asking us to be able to see the difference between I honestly I do think that this distinction between theoretical and practical reason is already in many respects like 80% of what Heidegger was on about with present at hand and ready to hand. I say 80% because it's not entirely the same, right? It's not identical, but in spirit, there's a lot, I think, similar.
Interesting. Yeah. So one thing I kind of this is again a kind of non sequitur, but anyways, so I'm interested in the third critique. In your opinion, do you think would it be a foolish errand of mine to try to read both of these at the same time?
No.
Or should I go in order?
I mean, generally, I would recommend people go in order, but I'm going to take it that you already have some secondhand familiarity of the first critique, or it's a limited firsthand familiarity, or some,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you already have some secondhand, right? I mean, so I think you can do both at the same time.
Yeah, I was thinking about possibly trying that. I don't. Maybe we could have a splinter subgroup doing the third critique simultaneously. That'll probably drive Nevitt insane. That's some good cat action going on there.
If you do the Splinter Cell, please let me know. I'd be curious to try it. I wouldn't shy away from it. And yeah, the cat, was it Captain Jack Sparrow? Cat Sparrow? He's amazing.
Captain Cat Sparrow, yeah.
Yeah, I've got a new cat, but he's been trying to catch a frog on my porch the past few days, so I think he's busy doing that. He got it in his mouth and yeah, lots of frogs up there. I miss Nevitt already. I mean, not that I mean Eric's great. Eric, you're great. But
Wait, wait. I should read. I love this group. We really should do the third critique. Cats are amazing. Mine's hunting a frog. I miss Nevitt in under 30 seconds. That's amazing.
yeah, I might have a little ADHD, maybe like a little bit.
Yeah, me too.
I don't know, too much like rhizomatic thinking. Yeah, it's definitely an issue. See, this is why I need the boundaries of reason to kind of keep me straight. Someone to give me like the no of the father and say like don't do this, do that, because otherwise I'm just like one of these I don't know, like a nomad or a skeptic or an anarchist or something like that, which is bad news.
Well, I'll tell you this. I'll give you a lifeline. You say, oh, I might be a skeptic. Oh, I might be an anarchist. Oh, such bad news. Well, have I got news for you? Hegel in 19, and this is me very briefly dipping into somebody else. Now, Eric,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
not gonna go where you expect me to. I don't think I'm gonna go where you expect, because Hegel, in his 10 theses to gain his doctorate, from his university when he was getting his doctorate in
So
19
good.
well in 18 I know, but just a brief anecdote. This is not a conceptual point. This is just an
Did you nail
anecdote.
him to the church door?
No, he had whatever. He had one that said Kant's project resolves ultimately in nothing more than a pessimistic skepticism. That was one of his 10 theses that he had to defend in Latin in a public debate against a member of the faculty at the university. That was one of 10, which was not the most controversial of the 10. But he was basically saying that, yeah, if you just follow Kant all the way, all you're going to end up in is skepticism, which most people who've read the rest of his work, rather than just those 10 theses, can agree. He's got his tongue in his cheek a little bit. He's being cute a little bit. Because it's not like he's like really like, oh, fuck all that. It's all a waste. This is what Eric was pointing to when somebody said, oh, do you think Hegel agrees with XYZ element of like, the unconditioned? I just want to say that. And just to put that to bed, I just, yeah, like a lot of this is pretty uncontroversial between the German idealist, as far as my reading of like the big figureheads in culture, like Kant, Fichte, Schelling, Hegel, Schlegel, well, Schlegel on the outside, whatever, a little bit like, those guys, like, yeah, it just seems like a lot of this was really, not the thing they felt they were disagreeing with to create their own project. A lot of this is the first and second preface. Like it would be pretty crazy. It would be pretty hard to still call yourself a German idealist if you were already like breaking from the project of establishing like the conditions for reason and for um you know why indifference is wrong and things like that. Like there's just things like that. I don't know. But yeah, so if you're worried about being a skeptic, certain youngsters of the next class would have been right there with you, Oh yeah.
So I'm in good company. Okay, that's comforting.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, you kind of you hang out with like those even younger youngsters like Nietzsche, and they're kind of on their own thing and all different, and I don't really get them, but there's a rebellious energy. So.
Yeah. So some of what you're saying reminded me also of my family reunion that I had last week, where basically to just kind of like fuck with my dad. I tried to uh defend Hume, the problem of induction, to his kind of like dogmatic scientism thing, and he told me I had a depressing worldview because I doubted like inductive certainty or something like that. I thought that was like a curious thing to say, but that's interesting that that's connected with like pessimistic skepticism, you know?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, that Hegelian thesis is probably better applied to Hume than it is to Kant, to be honest. But again, I have sympathies with what Hume is doing. I mean, it is constrained, within a certain kind of, given this method, this is what you get. You know what I mean? I'm not saying beyond that much else, right? So I think even Hume is good for what it is, right? Um, I also for Chase or anybody else's benefit, right? Because a lot of times Kant gets this treatment as this like kind of arch conservative, legalistic fuddy-duddy who tells you you're never allowed to lie, blah blah blah, right? Again, he was not regarded that way for much of the history of this, right? But immediately, the generations immediately after him saw him as a kind of a world destroyer, right? Participating in the modernity's destruction of the old world order and its verities. But this is from an essay, Isaiah Berlin's Two Concepts of Liberty, which if you haven't read, highly recommend, right? But in this, Berlin is quoting or he's citing Heine and spoke of Kant's critique of pure reason as the sword with which European deism had been decapitated. So I think you can appreciate the decapitation of deism.
That's fucking awesome. Yeah, I like that. Kill God. It's not good enough. Like God is dead. Like I want to like actually decapitate him. That's awesome. Yeah.
Eric, you said the Berlin's essay was what?
Two concepts of liberty,
Oh, of liberty. Okay.
which again, I mean, cast in these terms, right? Seen historically, right? Nietzsche's not entirely opposed to Kant in his critique of reason and his announcement of the death of God, but in many respects is just continuing Kant.
Well, I mean,
And is the Heine quote from Berlin?
Right. This is Berlin's words that I
Okay.
dropped in there, and he's
Oh,
citing.
okay.
All right, same bat time, same bat channel next week.
You know,
Go slay a god
I have
and
to say, I think Kant, yes, I think Kant is cooler after this meeting. Kant has gone up in cool points for me. I don't know about y'all, but
I think he was
I
kind
think
of
that's probably the most important part of this whole meeting, really.
I think
I
in
should keep
person
an actual score.
of cool points.
Yeah,
Who do you
Hunter,
think
you
there's?
would be like off the charts already.
Oh, thank you. I'm just saying. I think that Kant. It's in. Here's my thing. I think in text he's just showing his secret little self. I think in person he was probably really nebbish and kind of effete and kind of svelte and weak and small and kind of like a Woody Allen type.
He
Yeah.
did like practical jokes.
Really? He was a
Hey,
prankster? He was a little prankster?
Yeah.
and yeah,
Oh yeah, I love practical jokes.
and it
Really,
was
I
He
didn't know
might have
that.
invented the whoopee cushion, I'm not sure, but he would have really enjoyed that.
That would be that would be the bombshell of the century. If Immanuel Kant was the engineer behind the genius of the whoopee cushion.